Discovering Alabama is a production of the Alabama Museum of Natural History.
A dawn wind stirs on the great marsh. With almost imperceptible slowness, it rolls a bank of fog across the wide morass. A single silence hangs from horizon to horizon. Then, a far clear blast of hunting horns. High horns, low horns, silence. And finally, a pandemonium of trumpets, rattles, croaks, and cries that almost shakes the bog with its nearness. A new day has begun on the Crane Marsh.
Hi, I'm Doug Phillips, and here among the marshlands of the Tennessee River in North Alabama, I find a direct, tangible connection to the imagery so beautifully expressed by Aldo Leopold in his marshland elegy.
A sense of time lies thick and heavy on such a place. Yearly since the Ice Age, it has awakened to the clangor of cranes.
These words, first published in 1949, have inspired naturalists, conservationists, environmentalists, scientists, artists, and I count myself among those, moved to strap on my boots, bundle up, and wander out among the wonders so eloquently evoked by the words of Aldo Leopold.
Our ability to perceive quality in nature begins, as in art, with the pretty. It expands through successive stages of the beautiful to values as yet uncaptured by language. The quality of cranes lies, I think, in this higher gamut, as yet beyond the reach of words. Beyond the reach of words, the quality of cranes, like beauty itself, may lie in the eye of the beholder. And every winter, thousands flock to North Alabama to behold the cranes.
I see those too. There's a lot of them out there.
Yeah, there's a lot of capitals out there.
Wow.
Many come to join with throngs of fellow enthusiasts for the annual Festival of the Cranes. Some come for times of quiet observation.
I guess because ours have been fluffed up. I was going to say ours are bigger than that, but they've been so fluffed up.
And still others come for scientific observation.
Both these birds have one leg up. One has green, red, white. Actually, it's green, red, white, white, red. All these birds were over in Grus roosting. By the time I made it here, they were in this field.
Join me as we make our own observations here among the marshlands of North Alabama. We'll explore many of the questions posed by marshland elegy, and we'll ask of ourselves, must our essay be an elegy, a poem of lamentation, or may it be a song of celebration? Here along the floodplains of the Tennessee River, we will witness a marvel Aldo Leopold might never have imagined. We will witness the return of the whooping crane.
This program is about a land unknown to many people, a land that in many ways has maintained its native natural wonders, a place of bountiful backcountry, forests, streams, and wildlife more diverse than can be found in much of the inhabited world. Come along with me as we explore the wild wonders of this land. Come along as we discover Alabama.
Welcome to Discovering Alabama, and welcome to the Wheeler Wildlife Refuge. Long before humans migrated to the Tennessee Valley, migratory birds used this place for safe haven. Here they could rest, refuel, and hang out with fellow travelers.
Waterfowl especially were drawn to the bountiful wetlands, bogs, swamps, and marshes along the river. In the mid-1930s, TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, completed Wheeler Dam and forever changed the ebb and flow of the Tennessee. Forever changed critical habitat along one of the great North American flyways. Wheeler National Wildlife Refuge was established in 1938 in the hope that the migratory birds and other wildlife would find breeding grounds and indeed refuge along a region of the Tennessee River, which is now more accurately referred to as Wheeler Lake. Today, the refuge hosts some 650,000 annual visitors as they drop in from time to time. The importance of Wheeler to the birds migrating along the easternmost edge of the Mississippi Flyway cannot be overstated.
And the story is made all the more remarkable when you consider this 35,000-acre refuge is hunkered narrowly along a river flowing through one of the fastest growing regions of our state.
This can be a blessing and a curse for the National Wildlife Refuge and the critters who visit. On the one hand, it's difficult to get a good photograph without a man-made structure in the background. And often you can't get melodious bird songs apart from a cacophony of cars, trucks, planes, and trains. On the other hand, Wheeler is convenient for thousands of visitors who travel by motorized means.
And further down, you can kind of see them through your binoculars, that flock of ducks there. Those are mostly pintails.
Close to 300 species of birds have been identified at Wheeler National Wildlife Refuge, making this an integral loop on the North Alabama birding trail. Among the thousands of birds resting and refueling at Wheeler, perhaps none is more striking, more emblematic of the importance of wild wetland habitat than the cranes. And so they live and have their being, these cranes, not in the constricted present, but in the wider reaches of evolutionary time. Their annual return is the ticking of the geologic clock. Upon the place of their return, they confer a peculiar distinction. Amid the endless mediocrity of the commonplace, a crane marsh holds a paleontological patent of nobility, one in the march of eons. Leopold wrote these words in the late 1940s as he witnessed the annual summer return of sandhill cranes to the marshlands around his home in Wisconsin. Many of those cranes had possibly spent a little time in North Alabama.
But again, Leopold's essay is an elegy, a lament for the dwindling numbers of sandhill cranes and the habitat they called home.
The sadness discernible in some marshes arises, perhaps, from their once having harbored cranes. Now they stand humbled, adrift in history.
I wish Aldo Leopold could be with me here in North Alabama today. Perhaps he could bear witness to a drift in history that would lift his spirits.
In 1997, just 26 sandhill cranes were observed at Wheeler National Wildlife Refuge. Nowadays, those numbers have been known to approach 20,000. And among the thousands of sandhills, we can now enjoy a small yet very significant number of whooping cranes.
A lot of them are eating. They look busy eating, enjoying their meal. A lot of beautiful birds out there.
More and more whooping cranes are coming to Alabama every year. They love the Tennessee River Valley. They love, how wide it is. It has these great mud flats that they like to roost on. And then they love the corn and cotton and soybean fields that are empty in the wintertime.
We only work with things that are biologically considered to be cranes, and there are 15 species. They're all in the same family. They're all related to each other, and they're the cranes. The whooping crane is the rarest of all the crane species.
And the biggest.
It's
Tallest,
not the biggest.
tallest.
It's the tallest in North America.
We're really at a critical point in the conservation of this species. There's only about 400 whooping cranes in the wild. It sounds like a low number, but we're really on the upswing. In the 1940s, there were only about 15 birds, 1-5, in the wild. So 400 is a great improvement. And Alabama is one of the most important wintering areas for the eastern migratory population, if not the most important wintering area.
When we began the reintroduction of whooping cranes into an eastern flyway, we thought that we would have them breeding in Wisconsin and wintering in Florida. And we led them, or Operation Migration led them with ultralights to 2 sites in Florida. However, the whooping cranes did not elect to go back to Florida in great numbers. So the 2 major wintering areas today are Goose Pond State Wildlife Refuge in southern Indiana and the Wheeler Refuge here in Alabama.
We can be rightfully proud that a sizable percentage of these whooping cranes choose Alabama. But these winter guests are something of an anomaly.
The only population of wild whoopers follows a different path.
Wild whooping cranes can take care of themselves. They don't need anybody to help them at all. They are capable of nesting, rearing their young, leading them on their own. They don't need any kind of a plane or anything to lead them. 2,500 miles from Wood Buffalo National Park, where they nest, all the way to Aransas Refuge on the Texas coast. But we're losing lands. We lost over 160 million acres of wetlands where they used to nest in the United States.
The whooping cranes finding refuge in Alabama are part of what is often referred to as the experimental population. These birds would not be here at all except for human intervention. Eggs were taken from the wild population, incubated in Maryland, and the chicks, or colts as the young whoopers are called, were raised in Wisconsin. Then they were taught to migrate by following the ultralight aircraft of Operation Migration. The intent was to establish a new population.
That's the intent. We fly ourselves out of a job, exactly. We're hoping to establish a self-sustaining population. We've had some issues with, a number of issues, habitat, predation. It's difficult. Whooping cranes are a long-lived and slow-to-breed population. So that's a lot of migrating and a lot of surviving. It's a slow process to safeguard this species.
In 2016, Operation Migration was grounded. The decision was made by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for a variety of reasons, but the bottom line is that maybe the birds were experiencing too much human intervention. Whoopers proved very adept at learning from people, when what they needed was to be learning from each other. Today's more hands-off approach to raising this experimental population does not mean giving up on the goal of a self-sustaining eastern flock of whooping cranes.
It's very important, and see, because we need another population, at least one more. When you have one population like the one we deal with, there's always a chance that you could have some disease spread in the population and knock them out. There's always a chance of having a big oil spill. It might be an early hurricane that would come while they were still down there before they migrated, and certain natural things that could cause damage or wipe out of the population. So it's important to try to have one or two other populations, but you need to be aware that none of those populations would exist if we didn't have the wild population.
The challenge now is to look at these experimental whoopers in a much broader context, a context in which they and we share common ground.
The big issue overall is, especially with this population, is that North Alabama is holding roughly anywhere from 25 to 35% of this population comes to North Alabama and calls it home during the wintering season. The big problem is we don't know anything about this population in terms of their overwintering ecology. The whole goal for this population was for them to overwinter in Florida. But over time, more and more of these birds are wintering elsewhere, with North Alabama being one of these hot spots. So that opens up a whole, treasure chest of ecological questions that need to be answered. Why Wheeler National Wildlife Refuge? Why North Alabama even? And until we can understand why they're selecting some of the areas they're selecting, we have no way of really actively managing for these species. And there's a lot of time and effort being put into trying to reestablish or introduce these new populations.
The word management seems unavoidable these days when it comes to any discussion of wildlife.
Everything requires management, and the thing that needs managing the most is people. We need to manage ourselves so we can care about nature, including the cranes. There are scientific ways to increase the population of birds, and there's controversy about how to do that. But there's one thing that there's no controversy at all about, is that everything requires habitat. And so if we have the habitat set aside and we're careful how we behave ourselves, we can cause things not to disappear. It's a matter of how much you care.
How much do we care? Well, fortunately, many folks who live, work, and recreate in these parts enjoy having whooping cranes on the landscape.
So 200, yeah.
Working with the private landowners is a huge component. Like just today, we saw 11 of the 17 individuals that are out there at Wheeler at this moment. And the 11 of those 17 were on private property. When it comes to the private land that these cranes are found on, a lot of them are associated with hunting groups. And these hunting clubs, they spend the time and effort and the money to make these type of habitats good for waterfowl. And not only are they getting waterfowl, they're getting kind of this extra bonus of these whooping cranes coming in, other birds coming in. And most hunters, they love nature, and that's what it's all about, going out there, not just seeing what you're hunting for, but seeing a whole bunch of other things.
Bird watchers, farmers, hunters, any observer of nature understands the connectedness of all things natural. But for much of the public, nature needs a celebrity.
People get stirred up when there are celebrity birds. For example, when people first started seeing bald eagles around here, people were interested in that, and I would get calls. People like to see things that are unique. They like to have a cause. The truth of the matter is that all birds need a champion.
Whooping cranes are kind of like, they call them charismatic megafauna. That's something that you can draw the public interest to. And when you do that, you promote conservation in general. Because conservation is one of the critical things we're facing, And part of that is, of course, we owe it to the birds. We drove them to the edge of extinction. But the second part of that is it draws a lot of attention. And that draws attention to conservation.
Just the right fit.
Yeah, and I've been talking to a lot of folks about now that I'm part of this Whooping Crane Association and everything that goes with it, and they ask the question, well, how did you get involved with that? and then I tell them the story, and I'm having a great time with it, and I'm learning a lot as well. So I'm enjoying it very, very much. This is amazing, right here in our backyard. This is...
Yeah, I mean, people come from all over the United States, even some internationally, to come here.
Right.
And so we're just trying to help people in Alabama understand what a treasure this is and really appreciate what's in their
Right.
backyard. So.
And there's going to be a lot of folks that are like me that come here for the whooping cranes, but they see all these other beautiful birds out here. Yeah, it's
and we don't mind that at all.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing what Alabama has as far as our natural resources.
Absolutely,
yeah.
If you're going to save a whooping crane, you have to save its habitat. And you save it for whooping cranes, then you also save it for all those other less engaging creatures, you know, the snails and the bacteria and the weeds and the muck and all that stuff that makes a wetland an ecosystem, a complete ecosystem. And people don't understand how important ecosystems like that are. You know, their survival is going to guarantee ours.
So I'm a bird watcher, and you know, I'm not like a pro. I can't, you know, I can't bird by ear, but I tend to think about that connectedness. I tend to see that history that we share with all of these different life forms as inherently enriching. So now I'm going to get sort of vaguely metaphysical here, but if we look at our theories for the origin of the universe, they're expanding out. So time itself is inherently unidirectional. And to me, it's impossible to separate being interested in how we got here. I can't look at where we are today and not think in terms of where we've been and where we're going. And I think we have an imperative as citizens of this particular moment in the history of Earth to think about those questions.
Our appreciation of the crane grows with the slow unraveling of earthly history. His tribe, we now know, stems out of the remote Eocene. When we hear his call, we hear no mere bird. We hear the trumpet in the orchestra of evolution. He is the symbol of our untamable past, of that incredible sweep of millennia, which underlies and conditions the daily affairs of birds and men. I know there are many of you who are very familiar with Aldo Leopold's marshland elegy. I hope you'll forgive me for moving the words around a bit in a place or two. One thing I did not do, though, is take the words out of context. Didn't have to. Leopold's words from the late 1940s eloquently and accurately describe what we are facing here in the 21st century. The ultimate value of these marshes is wildness, and the crane is wildness incarnate. But all conservation of wildness is self-defeating. For to cherish, we must see and fondle. And when enough have seen and fondled, there is no wilderness left to cherish. Someday, perhaps in the fullness of geologic time, the last crane will trumpet his farewell and spiral skyward from the great marsh. And then a silence never to be broken, unless perchance in some far pasture of the Milky Way.
The closing words of Marshland Elegy are more than a little melancholy. But who knows, if Aldo Leopold could be with me today here in North Alabama, perhaps he would find great joy in the pandemonium of trumpets, rattles, croaks, and cries that almost shakes the bog.
Well, I was actually corrected once because I used to say whooping crane. I was very quickly corrected that it was whoop. So yeah, I guess it depends on who you talk to.
Whooping crane.
Whooping crane.
Whooping crane.
Well, I say whooping cranes, but some people say whooping cranes, you know, instead of blow it out.
Whooping crane.
Whooping crane.
I don't know. I think whooping is okay. Okay. Whooping, okay. They're big white birds and we have a big wing spread.
You know, how much somebody wants to challenge how you say something, but I just say whoop with a, you know, little bit of W.
Discovering Alabama is a production of the Alabama Museum of Natural History. This program is supported by grants from the Solon and Martha Dixon Foundation. The Alabama Wildlife Federation, working for wildlife since 1935. And the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at the University of Alabama, providing educational and social opportunities for adults.